Dr. Peter Muhlhausler has been educated all over the world, and now he's a research professor at the University of Adelaide in Australia. He's taught at the Technical University of Berlin, Oxford University, and he set up a linguistics program at the University of Adelaide. He specializes in Pidgin, Creole, and contact languages in the Pacific. This is his fourth visit to the Pitcairn Island Study Center, and I do hope that you all took an opportunity to visit this marvelous center that Herb Ford has set up and that is available to all of you, to all of us, for studying Pitcairn. Peter is actively involved in documentation as well as preservation and revival of the languages Pitcairners. And I wonder if you noticed on Sunday night when Pitcairners came, especially those who were not expected, and the Pitcairners who were here, and all of a sudden there was language that, well, we know we've heard before because we've been to Pitcairn, but when you see the people actually interacting with it, it was a wonderful, wonderful thing to enjoy. Peter is going to speak to us on Ned Young, creator of the linguistic landscape of Pitcairn Island.
Okay, thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you also everyone for organizing this marvelous conference and providing me with the opportunity to meet so many of you. Now, many years ago, I had a Chinese meal and a fortune cookie, and I opened it and it said, "A lecturer is someone who talks in other people's sleep." Now, I hope this is not going to be the case, but it's much more serious. Because of my jet lag, I may end up talking in my own sleep, and I just forgot to bring one of my teaching aids. I've retrieved it now, which is a bit of the language I'm concerned with. Now, I'm a linguist. What do linguists do? They're concerned with the way languages come into being, how languages develop, how they die, and in my case, what can you do to prevent languages from dying out and keep linguistic diversity going? Linguistics started in the 19th century as the handmaiden to historians, interpreting documents and so on. In the 20th century, linguistics became independent. They didn't want to know anything about history or sociology or anything, just structure and grammar. And now in the 21st century, linguists again try and integrate language, history, society, and also the natural environment. My first contact with the language of the Pitcairners was a book by Ross and Moverley, The Pitcairnese Language, which was published in 1964. And in 1975, I came across a quotation by John Reinecke, which you have in the paper, which was sent to you electronically by the organizer of this conference, which said that Pitcairnese, as it was called, was the best laboratory case of a language coming into being. All the ingredients were known, the people, the languages in contact, the visitors, and so on. So if you studied this language, you would get the most basic principles of how languages come into being and develop. Now, Reinecke was wrong in many ways. He said, for instance, only two languages were in contact, namely Tahitian and English, suggesting that Pitcairnese was a mixture of the two. What I'm trying to tell you, the story was entirely different. Now, I have for this paper a number of questions. Two of the questions come from other people, the rest are mine. You should have a handout. There should be enough handouts to go around for everyone. The first question is what I call Silverman's riddle. Why didn't Tahitian become the language of Pitcairn Island? because the demographic information clearly favored that scenario. The second question is what I call Gay Evans's question, and you got Gay Evans's question on the handout under number 1. And Gay Evans observed that when she went to the West Indies, she spoke Norfolk, and everybody understood her. So why is it that West Indians can understand the language of the Pitcairn descendants? That was her question. She sent me this email a little while ago. The next question is one that I have. Why was there a division of labor for 2 languages, English and Pitcairn? Why not just one language on the island? And then there's another question. What are the reasons for the rules that govern how languages are used, how this division of labor is made, how Pitcairners ask questions, and so on? The pragmatics of both English and Pitcairn and Norfolk is quite different from the pragmatics of Anglo-English. And finally, I ask, why did literacy prevail on the island? That's an easy one. Now, I have a number of claims, and you got those claims on the handout under number 2. All of this is due to Ned Young, the mutineer who was born on St. Kitts Island. Ned was responsible for the continued use of educated English. He was responsible for universal literacy. He was responsible for the use of an informal English-based contact language, which some people call St. Kitts Creole or Tahitian, and he was also responsible for the disappearance of the Tahitian language. Now, how do I support these claims? I've got 2 sorts of arguments. The first ones are, what are the historical circumstances? And the second one is, I argue that language is a memory of history. I look at the lexicon and the grammar. What can this linguistic evidence tell me about what happened 200 years ago? Now, you probably cannot attack me on the second one because you're not linguists, but you can certainly attack me in my first points, and I'm going to present them. Well, the first thing I tried to do is to find out as much as I could about Ned Young. And it's a bit difficult because, A, the archives in St. Kitts burned down a few years ago. Ned Young's diary got lost. And Young's family obviously was not very forthcoming when talking about a member of their family who had been a mutineer and had disgraced himself and also was probably an illegitimate child of one of their more important family members. Now, also, he had some African blood as well. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter for my argument whether Ned Young was 50%, 75%, 25% African or not. It's totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter for my argument whether Sir George Young was the actual biological father or not. I think there's lots of evidence that he wasn't. I've got this in my paper, but that's irrelevant. And it doesn't matter whether Ned Young got his education on St. Kitts or in Britain. All of this doesn't change any part of my argument. What matters is the following. Ned Young was highly educated, capable of using educated English, both in written and spoken form. He was very popular with the women and children on Pitcairn Island, and he played an important role in their linguistic socialization through reading and through storytelling. Subsequent to the death of Quintal and McCoy, Young instituted a school and taught the children to read and write. He also trained Adams to continue his job after his death in 1800. And demographically, At the time of his death, Young was the father and stepfather, the father of 5 and the stepfather of 3 children, more than 1/3 of the children that ran around Pitcairn Island in 1800. Among these stepchildren, that's the next point, there was Thursday October Christian, and the name is actually quite interesting. It may be that Young had a hand in giving this name because on St. Kitts there's a tradition of day names among the Creole, African Creole community. But I don't know. But Thursday October Christian was the firstborn on Pitcairn. He was the role model for younger children, and it would seem that Ned Young influenced his thinking and linguistic behavior in a major way. And we can see an interview that Beachy had with Thursday October, that's number 3. Well, they speak commonly English, they only understand Tahitian, but not particularly well, and the women speak poor English, not Tahitian, when they communicate with the children. Now, because of these factors, and a few others that I give in my paper, I argue that Ned Young was the principal linguistic role model for the islanders. Now, I note in my paper that language transmission is not a question of children speaking their mother's language. In fact, a lot of children don't. Children make their own choices. They speak like their peers, like people they admire and identify with. I mean, I certainly don't speak my mother's language. My mother was born in the north of Germany. I speak Black Forest Alemannic, and in my paper I have this nice story. I had a lecture on mother tongue, and I asked the students, "What's your mother tongue?" And this girl who said Irish, and I asked her, "What did your mother speak?" And she said, "My mother spoke English. She hated Irish." Well, so the notion of mother tongue is a very dangerous one. You have to ask, who are the linguistic socializers? And my contention is Ned Young was the one who was the principal linguistic socializer. Now, what did Ned Young speak? Well, he grew up on St. Kitts, and the language situation in 18th century St. Kitts was fairly straightforward. You had white plantation owners who spoke educated English, black slaves who spoke St. Kitts Creole and several African languages that never lasted more than 1 generation. White and black children mixed, and they usually communicated in St. Kitts Creole. Now, the mixed children often had an African nursemaid and African playmates, so Ned Young would have known English because he was from an educated background. He would have had probably someone who taught him proper English, but he also would have known the informal English. At the time, Ned would not have realized that we're actually dealing with 2 different languages. It was just a formal kind of English and an informal one, and there was this division of labor, the formal English to talk to your parents, your teachers, to ministers of religion, the informal one talking to your nanny, to other children, for storytelling, for playing, and so on. This is exactly what Ned Young also seemed to have done on Pitcairn. And if you look at the language ecology, the language landscape of Pitcairn, it's remarkably similar to that of St. Kitts. So you had English as the dominant high language spoken for religion, for education, and so on. You have Pitcairn, the informal language, which is used for play, for family, for intimate situation, and so on. And then, like in St. Kitts, the other language, in this case Tahitian or Tubuain, didn't matter. It had no social status. It simply disappeared, like African languages also disappeared in St. Kitts. Okay. In addition, Ned Young knew some Tahitian, well, probably quite a bit. He didn't use it, he understood it, but at times he mixed a bit of Tahitian into the informal English, and this may go back to the days when this mixed English Tahitian was used to defy Captain Bligh, and I've got a quotation, number 4 from Deaning, that sort of gives you the scenario how this mixed language was used by the sailors. I also got, this is quite interesting, number 5 and 6, a comparison between the kind of English that was used by Ned Young, the educated variety, and the one that was used by John Adams. Without Young teaching Adams, English would have gone downhill very quickly. Okay, that's what I have to say about the history, and I hope you can shoot holes or add to what I want to argue. Now, I'm a linguist, and last year I invited an old colleague and friend of mine who had been my assistant on a project on Pacific contact languages when I was still in Oxford. I invited him to come to Adelaide because he is the world's leading specialist on St. Kitts. And he had dug up all sorts of interesting documents that had not been known before. And we spent a month together going through the linguistic evidence, just sort of, well, ransacking data and interpreting data. Now, there is a difference between stating that Pitcairn, Norfolk on the one hand and Kittian or St. Kitts share a lot of words and share a lot of grammar. Well, of course they would, for a very simple reason. They all are ultimately derived from English. So if Pitcairn has the word house, that means house, and St. Kitts English has the word house, that doesn't mean very much, because the sailors also had it, or the other ones. If, on the other hand, there are words that are only found in Kittian or St. Kitts English and in Norfolk, it's a different matter. So if you have a word like, where's my teacher? Here, like Mola for tomorrow, now that's meaningful. You don't get it in any other language except for St. Kitts and in Pitcairn, Norfolk, or a word like, well, there's a list of 50 words that you have got on your handout in the appendix. Right, originally, if you look at Ross and Moberly, they found one word of St. Kitts origin. Philip and I found more than 50, and I'm confident that if we dig a bit more, we'll probably come up with quite a few more. Now, the number of distinct words in Pitcairn distinct from English is probably about 500, so 50 words is already 10% of the vocabulary, and are probably going to be more than 10%. It's more than the Tahitian content. What's also important is the words are words that are frequent words. The Tahitian words tend to be very low on the frequency list. And it's words that reflect that Young must have interacted with the children. So if we have a word like shimmy for child's vest, or hide hyrb for to play hide and seek, which is only known in St. Kitts and in Pitcairn and Norfolk, that suggests that he was very much involved playing with the children and linguistically socializing the children during playtime. Another interesting area is a lot of fish names seem to have a St. Kitts equivalent. Well, he knew tropical fish having grown up in the West Indies, and he may have transferred those fish names to Pitcairn Island. Okay, I shall stop because I've got 2.5 minutes left, or 3 minutes left, and try and draw it all together and present you with my conclusions if I can find them. I said I'm sort of half dopey. Well, let's see. I make an effort to find them. Somewhere I've got them. Oh, that's great. Now I've got them. Well, in a popular understanding of criminal law in the United States, a jury can find an accused guilty if the prosecution can prove the means, the ability to carry out the deed, the motive, having reasons for carrying out the deed, and the opportunity. I've produced a number of arguments to support that Ned Young had all three of them and therefore was the guilty party. He was responsible for the continued use of educated English on Pitcairn Island. He was responsible for universal literacy in English. He was responsible for the use of an informal English-based contact language, St. Kitts Creole originally, and he was probably also responsible for the disappearance for the Tahitian language. Now, what I've said is actually very different from what linguists have said about the language. Linguists have tried to say it's a mixed language of Tahitian and English varieties coming together. They've said it was the children who invented a new language, or they said it's a continuation of the pidgin used by the women that eventually sort of got a bit more elaborated over time. What I'm saying is actually there was no language invention. It was a language that already existed, which was transported and planted into a new environment. Of course, it was changed. All languages changed. Some Tahitian words were added, some local expressions were added, but essentially it is an Atlantic Creole language transported from St. Kitts, which I'm sure Gay Evans will be very pleased to hear. Okay, I've got a much more elaborate and detailed copy of my paper in an electronic version. I think Ted has sent it to everyone. People who haven't got it should try and get it from him. Well, thank you very much.